The war in the Middle East has entered a new and dangerous phase. The battlefield is no longer just military bases and command centers. Today, the bombs are hitting the energy infrastructure of the entire region. The United States has targeted Kharg Island, the main artery of Iranian oil exports. Iran insists its facilities are intact, but the message has been sent: no oil tanker is safe. In retaliation, Iran has struck back, forcing the suspension of activities at the Fujairah port in the UAE, one of the most vital oil transshipment points in the Gulf. President Donald Trump, meanwhile, threatens total bombing of Iranian oil facilities if necessary. Iran threatens to expand its attacks against the UAE, targeting vital installations. Meanwhile, a formation of B-52 bombers has been spotted heading toward the Middle East, fleet capable of carpet bombing and seen since the invasion of Iraq. More than 2 weeks into this war, the U.S. strategy is unraveling. CNN admits it. The Iran war has gone off the American calculations. The plan to decapitate the regime and install a compliant leader has backfired. All the candidates Washington had in mind are dead now. The new supreme leader is in place, and he is vowing revenge. The world is now facing an energy crisis, a potential environmental catastrophe, and a war that no one, not Washington, not Tel Aviv, seems to know how to end. This is All 24 News Special. Hello and welcome back to our special for tonight. To understand where we are on day 15 of this war in the Middle East, our own Zahra Farjani has compiled this report for us. Let's follow and then we come back.
A fortnight into the war, tensions are still rising in the Middle East after the United States carried out major airstrikes on Kharg Island, a key hub for Iran's oil exports. While Washington says the strikes targeted military sites, Tehran warns of retaliation if its energy facilities are attacked. U.S. President Donald Trump said the United States Central Command conducted what he described as one of the strongest air raids in the region's history, claiming military targets on the island were completely destroyed.
The U.S. Central Command has carried out one of the strongest airstrikes in the history of the Middle East, destroying every military target on Iran's cross jewel, Kharg Island. I chose not to destroy the oil infrastructure, but if Iran interferes with the free passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, I will reconsider that decision.
Iranian media, including Fars news agency, reported around 15 explosions, but said the island's oil infrastructure, which handles most of Iran's exports, was not damaged. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned that any attack on Iran's energy facilities would trigger retaliation.
Iran will respond to any attack on its energy facilities. If Iranian installations are targeted, our forces will target American companies in the region or companies in which the United States holds stakes. The attack on Kharg Island was launched from neighboring territories, and U.S. HIMARS missiles were fired from nearby states.
Meanwhile, Iranian authorities reported 6 people killed in renewed strikes in western Iran, while the Wall Street Journal cited Pentagon sources saying 13 U.S. soldiers have been killed and about 200 injured since the start of the U.S. campaign on February 28th. With strikes continuing and warnings of retaliation growing, tensions between Washington and Tehran are deepening, raising concerns over the security of the Strait of Hormuz and the stability of global energy supplies.
And to dissect this new phase of the war, the energy phase, we are joined live by 4 distinguished experts. From Los Angeles is Dr. Hamoud Salhi, Associate Dean, Professor of International Studies at California State University. Hello there, Professor, and thank you for agreeing to be with us tonight. I wonder whether you can hear me, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. And from New York is Mr. Mohammed Chris Sassi. He's a geopolitical analyst and financial expert. Hello there, sir, and thank you for agreeing to be with us tonight. And from London is Mr. David Powell, Middle East analyst and former Pan-Arab TV journalist. Hello, sir, and thank you for agreeing to be with us in this late hour. And from Glasgow is Dr. Yvonne Ridley, veteran British journalist and author. Thank you, ma'am, for agreeing to be with us tonight.
Thank you.
So let's start with the collapse of the American plan in this discussion. And the big picture is, or goes like this: CNN is publishing a lengthy investigation titled "The Iran War Has Gone Off the American Calculations After 2 Weeks." The report details how the assassination of Khamenei killed not just the leader, but all the potential successors Washington was banking on. The new supreme leader is Mujtaba Khamenei, who is vowing revenge, and instead of collapse, Iran is fighting back harder. Well, at least that is what we hear in the Western media narrative. Dr. Hamoud Salhi, you've studied U.S. foreign policy for decades now. So is this simply a failure of intelligence, or is it a fundamental misunderstanding of how Iran really works? The assumption seems to have been that Iran is a house of cards, remove the top and the rest collapses. But Iran is demonstrating resilience. What did Washington miss here? Well, it seems that we're having a connection issue with Dr. Hamoud Salhi, so let me redirect this question to you, Dr. Yvonne Ridley.
Yes. Well, the Americans have severely underestimated the Iranian regime. As I've said in the past, Iran has had nearly 50 years to prepare for this war. It knew it was coming, but wasn't quite sure when until President Donald Trump began his shenanigans across the globe. Everyone saw this massive military buildup from America, but no one really believed that the Americans would attack Iran, and they finally did. What the Americans didn't realize is that the military strategists in Tehran have been working on this for decades, not just a few years. And there are 31 provinces in Iran, and every single province has its own independent military command. And this was masterminded by an Iranian major general called Aziz Jafari, who retired as commander-in-chief from the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in 2019. But before he retired, he put in place that every single one of the 31 provincial commands would be independent of each other. So if half the country was wiped out militarily, there would still be 50% left, all operating individually of each other. And so it's not cutting the head off a snake and creating the Hydra. The Hydra was already put in place. And so if they lose another supreme leader, if they lose another military general, another commander, it won't make any difference. Mm-hmm. The war machine in Iran has been configured in such a way that it will go on. And they are prepared to go on. They are prepared to go on indefinitely. And they've also said that there's no way that they want to stop and have peace talks or a ceasefire, because they no longer trust the Americans as honest brokers. They were sitting with the Americans in negotiations over the nuclear development in Iran when this war started without warning. We were told by the representative from Oman that the nuclear talks were going incredibly well, and he was very upbeat and positive, and he was absolutely shocked when Trump unleashed this war on Iran. He has severely underestimated the Iranians right from day one. In fact, even before then, when this extraordinary military buildup began to happen, he thought that would be enough to bring the Iranians to their knees. And of course, it hasn't. If anything, he was after regime change, but if anything, ordinary Iranian people have come together and are against their country being bombed. So,
and since you mentioned,
actually,
technically, I want to highlight also another part that is important, and it was also noted on the CNN report. It says that inside Iran, there is no immediate sign of popular uprising. In fact, some Iranians who initially supported the strikes are now reconsidering this. One man told CNN, and I quote, "I thought killing Khamenei would end everything. Now I realize they are fanatics, and his martyrdom increased their enthusiasm." Now, what is the mood on the Iranian street from what you can gather yourself, Dr. Yvonne Ridley?
well, this is a very diverse population, and it's also a very intelligent population as well. And they have also mentally been preparing for this war for decades. So, they've already gone through decades of hardship because of the American sanctions placed on the country. And they're a really resilient people. And they will, I believe, the majority will rally round to the regime. If they don't like their government, they're not showing it at the moment. They're getting behind them. And the pockets of unrest that we have seen are really not representative of the people. We saw this they're still in this period of mourning for the previous supreme leader, and there are millions who mourned his death. What we get to see in the West is a little slice of North Tehran, where the intellectual English-speaking elite get a chance to express their dismay to the BBC. But the BBC isn't speaking to the working classes. They're not reflecting the views of the working classes, especially in the south of Iran, where there is huge support for the regime. So what we are seeing in the West, we're being fed daily stories from English-speaking intellectual elite members of the North Tehran community who do not represent the views of the entire nation. In fact, they're quite out of touch with the misery and suffering of the working classes. So, be very wary when watching the BBC, because we're just getting censored news. And this is another thing. All we are hearing and seeing at the moment is Donald Trump saying he's having a great war. He's doing
Thank you indeed. So, Dr. Hamoud Salhi, according to Ivan, there is a big miscalculation in the American ranks. On the one hand, they were, let's say, relying on a regime collapse. They were perhaps relying as well on a popular uprising, but that's not what happened. And my initial question was for you as where or what did the American intelligence perhaps miss, Dr. Hamoud Salhi?
And thank you for having me, Karim, and hi to Ivan for sharing this plateau with her. I think there are a lot of things here. On the initially, if we just remember a little bit, initially, the fundamental goal of this war was to do the regime change. And the theory behind it was a decapitulation of the leadership, and then the masses will rally behind against the regime. You get chaos, you get country in shambles, you get the regime weakened, and that's where the whole mess, the whole Iran fell, or at least you create a chaos, and will give the opportunity for the Americans and the Israelis to do what they are best at, meaning attacking the country and bombing and doing all the other things that comes with it. From there, you have sort of different interpretation. There is interpretation that this was a not understanding Iran, that this is due to the President Donald Trump failure to listen to his experts. There are also those who felt that the United States fell in what they call an escalation trap. And basically what happened, we see the sophistication of the Iranian leadership in overcoming the death of their leader initially, and then opted to what surprised perhaps the Americans and the Israelis, is to broaden, as they said before, the war to those who are part of the attack on them, the attack on countries that had given information to the Americans for attacking Iran, participating in one way or another, were targeted. And the theory behind it, or the strategy behind it, is that the Iranians are now broadening their base by forcing these countries to demand the United States to stop the war. So they will be acting on its behalf, putting pressure on the American. For reason, obviously, they were affected. But then something changed with the oil refinery, and that sort of take this war to a different level, and which gave the Iranians another upper hand by taking control of the Hormuz Strait, by attacking or responding, retaliating to the attacks on their oil refinery and the infrastructure. What they did is that they broadened the conflict, or the parties that are affected by this war, to multiple actors, including Russia, including the Western world, who is now worried about the consequences of the war and are pushing or are expected to push for the end of the war or stop the hostilities against the Iranian. So, and that's where we are at this point, is that we're seeing this huge increase in oil prices, inflations, fertilizers, all of this, and these are strategically are designed by the Iranians, or to have these countries lobby the United States to stop the war in Israel from that perspective. So in more ways than one, what we're seeing is that the ability of the Iranian to read better and to do better in understanding this military strategy and using it to their advantage, so that it is no longer an Iranian problem at this point. Well, their country is being attacked, but it is also the problem of others, and these others have to come and stop the United States from what the international law describes and is clear that this is an invasion, an attack on the sovereignty of another state. So, Karim, you could interpret it different ways, but in a lot of ways, this is a clever move. And it demonstrates how the Iranians are using, are strategically perhaps wiser, better equipped to work on this conflict than the Americans, or for the matter, the Zionist entity.
Thank you indeed. And now let's include Mr. David Powell into this discussion. Mr. David, you've actually worked on the Middle East and Pan-Arab, and you have actually covered such issues before. And according to your perspective and your expertise, how is this being received, according to you, in many capitals across the Arab world? So we have seen that the US went to war, between two inverted commas, to liberate Iran, but it has instead empowered a new leadership that is more radical and more vengeful, at least in the eyes of Western media. Now, are we witnessing some kind of a state of panic between the leaders of the alliance here against Iran?
Those are two very interesting questions, but they're two separate questions. Regarding how this is being seen in the region, I think there are two important areas to bear in mind. First, the Gulf states themselves, who have come under attack, direct attack by Iran, although they've been at pains to say that their bases are not being used by the US, or of course not by Israel, to attack Iran. So yes, Iran is obviously trying to pressure the US via the Gulf states to try and stop this, but there's no sign of that policy actually working. And certainly the anger in the Gulf states at what Iran is doing, the damage that it's doing to Gulf infrastructure, is certainly not playing well in Gulf capitals. Now, the other important country to bear in mind is Lebanon. Hezbollah has obviously taken advantage of this conflict to attack Israel with missiles, and is now suffering an overwhelming response from Israel, which of course means that, as always, the ordinary Lebanese are suffering. But for the first time, the Lebanese government has been very outspoken against what Iran is doing, or against what Hezbollah is doing. And Hezbollah is of course, Iran's main regional proxy. So I think in those two areas of the Arab world, Iran's reputation has gone right down. And I don't think it's a very clever strategic move by the Iranians to directly attack their neighbors in the Gulf if they want to, at the same time, as they have been, appeal to the Gulf states to combine, to ally with Iran as the security guarantee for the Gulf. That was the Iranian regime's argument to the GCC, that the GCC should abandon the US and Iran would be its cooperative partner in Gulf security. Well, that's completely gone out of the window for the foreseeable future. So in that sense, I think Iran's strategy doesn't really make sense because it's alienated a lot of Arab opinion.
Thank you indeed. And now let's move on to the impact on the markets and include here Mr. Mohammed Chris Sassi. So, Mr. Mohammed Chris Sassi, can you tell us? We know for a fact that markets hate uncertainty, but the report that we heard from on the one that was released by CNN, it screams uncertainty all the way. So the US has no exit strategy. The leadership in Iran is now more hardline, at least this is what the Western media is saying, and the war is expanding. It is here and it is now. How are investors, amid all this mass, pricing this? And what does it mean for the Trump trade, between two inverted commas, that was built on the promise of no war or no new wars?
Yes. I just, if you allow me, I would like to answer what was just said by the gentleman, and also to follow what Yvonne said as well, Dr. Salahi. I think in Iran, the US has bitten off more than they can chew. And they forget about the resilience of the Iranian people and the Iranian institution. They were waiting since 40 years, as Yvonne was saying, that they are going to be attacked. Without any kind of aggression of their part, and you have to enhance that, they were attacked by Israel and America. All this because the only regime that stand up to the submission of the GCC country to the dictatorship of America and Israel was Iran. Don't forget, Israel attacked all its neighbors. And we saw what happened in Gaza, we saw what happened in Lebanon, we saw what happened in Yemen as well as Iraq. So when I can hear that the strategy of the Iranian people and Iranian government is wrong, I'm very surprised. I am surprised that the honesty and the integrity of what happened is hidden. They don't have any choice. They were surrounded by all this country who want to distract them. It's not the other way around, that existential for Israel and the state. They never been attacked by Iran. It's the other way around. Why? Because it was the only country that was standing on the way of the hegemony of the Zionists and America. Now, to get back to your question on the economic side. Yes, the trade casualty for Trump. Trump come here and promised during his campaign for election that is not going to be war. He even said about Pamela that they say the third war is coming if she's elected. Now we have the barrel, the Brent, before we begin this show, I was checking, it is at $103 for the barrel. We have the tariff that Trump is imposing on the country who are helping or not recognizing to go and make the war with him. And of course, you have the chain and the economic interdependence that now is all the way disrupted. Why is it disrupted? You have US and Israeli strike on Iranian target, the missile retaliation from Iran, and you have the, as Dr. Salhi was saying, the Strait of Hormuz, which is the passage obligé for the 20% or 30% of the oil of the world. And of course, this raised oil price and global economic instability. Now, why this conflict hurt Trump trade agenda? Number one, you have a higher transport for the production of the oil and is more than 45% to take other way. Number two, it will increase, of course, inflation. And it will reduce the competitiveness of US export. And the global trade doesn't like that. You are going to have delay in supply chain. You have to have the reduced global trade flow. And of course, increasing the shipping insurance and freight costs. And all this, now, we are not simply in a war. In a region, you have an economical war. And this touch all the world trade. Now, what can we do? Because you have this fluctuation and all this strategy that move from an economical and political war with the military operation, with the, we created an energy security, insecurity if you prefer, and also, bien sûr, the foreign policy and security dominate the agenda. My friend from London, I guess, was saying that, you know, Iran was attacking his neighbor. No, he was only defending himself. The American base were in Doha. The American base was in Bahrain. The American base was in Saudi Arabia. And they were where for what? Just to attack Iran. Now we can ignore it, but it's not the truth. The truth, as Dr. Salhi was saying as well as Ivan, it's there, it was to attack Iran, and this is what they did. But now, as I was saying, the Iran war, the American, they cannot make it. And I repeat what I was saying in the beginning, is no winner for now, and the US has bitten off more than they can chew. It cost them, at the time when I'm talking to you, $2 billion a day. Mm-hmm. $2 billion a day. And who is paying it? American taxpayer. Israel cannot sustain that kind of spending. You know, they get $3.8 billion for the first week. I don't know how much is it now. Mm-hmm. Of course, this is going to disturb, but you have to recognize one thing. We don't see any strategy. We don't see the real cause why they are there. And when you listen to the American, when they say Venezuela and Iran is 1/3 of the oil of the world, and we are going to make a ton of money. Unfortunately, they were not fighting against Venezuela, and they are not fighting against a small country like Israel. You have 95 million people. They're waiting for 40 years for this war, and also is as big as Europe. And this is why it's going all. We are going to have a negotiation to stop this war that is insane, because now what Iran said to the European, if you take off your ambassador from Israel and America, we are going to let you pass for free. So it's a kind already of a backdoor negotiation. You have going to have the Russian and the Chinese that are going to be involved, because they cannot ignore their sourcing of making their economy run. And on the top of it, you have also the BRICS that is coming to take off the sacrosanct dollar in the world economy. Why? Because America is one the cow in the global world. And I give you back the word. Thank you.
Thank you indeed. Now let's move on to Dr. Hamoud Salhi. Dr. Hamoud Salhi, we've been listening to both David Powell and Mohammed Kristasi, who said that the Americans, in fact, in this war have bitten off maybe more than they can chew. And according to Mr. Mohammed Kristasi, he says he disagrees with David Powell that they shouldn't have attacked their neighbors, although they were provoked. And their reasoning is that U.S. bases are being used in the aggression against Iran, and this makes these bases a legitimate target in war. So according to David Powell, the Iranian and the Gulf countries had an opportunity, at least on the economic front, to form some sort of an alliance and become allies. Now, how do you position yourself in this?
Before the war, before all this happening, the relationship between the countries you had to distinguish the political and then the trades, the economics of it. Dubai, for example, where the UAE has major issues with Iran over the sovereignty of the three islands. Greater Tomp, Lesser Tomp, and then the island of Musa. The name escapes me. But those three islands were sort of the UAE has claimed that it is theirs. So there is a controversy there, and it has been there for quite some time. But despite those differences, the trades among those countries between the UAE or Dubai and Tehran were always normal. You would not differentiate, or you would not see that there is some kind of problems between the two. So I agree, there are fundamental rights there. There are some fundamentals there to make the region sort of safer. But there are outside interests. There are multiple parties that have bigger interest in seeing this region divided, and I think that's what's happening. I think we had a glimpse of hope after the end of the Kuwait war, where the countries of the Gulf plus Egypt and Syria form what we talk about, what was referred to the Damascus Declaration, and that's paved the way. Would have paved the way for greater, stronger collaboration, regional cooperation. On the nuclear front, the proposition that Omanis have for years advocated that the Gulf should be a nuclear freeze, that there not be any, or the entire nuclear ise should be free, that nobody should have these nuclear weapons. The proposal that on security has always been sort of very, very cordial. Even when you read the communiques that came out of the Gulf Cooperation Council meetings, the annual, sometimes biannual, sometimes twice a year, they always have been very conscious about not creating conditions for for making the confrontation in the region more than anything else. So we have a background there. Now, in the issue of attacking, we tend to forget the neighboring countries. I mean, legally, there is foundation for this. I mean, international law allows what we call self-defense, and this is protected by the Article 51 of the Charter, of the UN Charter. What you needed, however, is proof that the parties who are involved, or the third parties, that is, in this case, the Gulf countries, that they are, number one, part of the attack, and second, that they are not forced to. Now, when we follow the subsequent event that's happening after that, and we hear about the United Nations General Assembly, the United Nations Security Council meeting, it is obvious that the countries in the region have a say in this. We know that refueling is occurring on the states' territories. We know that there are military bases there that are providing intelligence against Iran. We know that there are treaties between each of the countries with the United States. We know that there are normalized relations between certain countries of the region and Israel. Those are all fundamentals that, when you take it to court, will give more credence to the Iranians and less to the neighboring countries. And on top of that, you had the president who came in, of the Iranian president, who came in and apologized, or sort of apologize, but at the same time explain the reasons why the Iranian is doing what it was doing. And basically, that second sort of item that was added to his apology meant it could be seen as a message or a warning that if you don't assist, or if you are not part of any attack on Iran, you're not going to be sort of attacked. And that's where the discussion is. So it's a very, very delicate issues, and there are a lot of things there that are going on. But the sad thing about all of this is the fact that you have the region coming against itself. And the only benefactors, if there is any, the biggest loser of this are the people of the region.
Mm-hmm. And back to you, Mr. David Powell. We see that the UAE is a U.S. ally, and many of the Gulf countries, for that matter, are the allies of the USA. And they have spent decades positioning themselves as a safe haven, notably including the UAE, for business, a hub for finance and tourism. Now we see the UAE's port being shut down by Iranian drones. Now, what message does this send to Gulf states in general about the value of the American security umbrella? Who's really protecting who in this equation?
Well, I think direct attacks like on Dubai port, on oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, on even against Oman. I mean, talk about Oman was actually hosting negotiations between the US and Iran. These attacks, I think the message they send to the Gulf states is that Iran doesn't have their security at heart, and outside allies such as China, which has been forging very close relations with Iran, they're not going to come to their rescue either. I mean, since the attack on the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia some years ago, the Saudis tried to reach out to other powers, thinking that the US might not come to their aid if they were to be subject to direct attacks, as they were some years ago. So the Gulf states have been trying to balance their security alliances and not rely solely on the US. But I think this latest conflict shows that the US is the only power that's prepared to step in to defend the Gulf states. Now, you might say they're not doing a very good job of it because these missiles are getting through. But the rate of missile attacks is getting less. And in purely military terms, Iran is losing this fight. It's thrashing out in other ways, and the attacks on its neighbours are an example of that. Rather like the Samson option. Well, if we're going to go down, we're going to take the whole region down with us. And their argument that this will somehow put pressure on the US and Israel to stop this war, I don't think is being borne out but by the facts. So in terms of security, as I said, I think this means that the Gulf states will not look to Iran as a partner in future. This is a watershed in relations between Gulf states and Iran. They can see this regime doesn't have their interests at heart. And I think the wider Arab world is waking up to the threat that Iran poses to them more generally. And it, of course, goes back to the October the 7th, 2023 attack on Israel by Iran's ally Hamas, which led to complete catastrophe for Gaza and for the entire Palestinian cause. So I think there's a lot of skepticism about what this Iranian regime means for the Arab world. Is it a friend? Is it an ally? I think most people are realizing it's not.
Mm-hmm. Thank you indeed, Mr. David Powell. Let me get back to Dr. Yvonne Ridley now. So you've been listening to our distinguished guests discussing different views, different perspectives when it comes to what's happening on the ground, whether it's in the benefit of Iran or not, whether the alliance or there could be any kind of alliance or at least, partnership between the Arab states and Iran after this war. How do you see it yourself, Dr. Yvonne Ridley? Is Iran really losing this war, and the very proof is that it's randomly attacking its neighbors? And of course, by so doing, it is actually sanctioning itself and kind of a death sentence for its relations with the Arab states.
I don't think Iran is losing the war in as much as it's hunkered down for the next few months. This is not a war that America or Israel can win. But I have to respectfully disagree with David Powell in London because, the Gulf states thought that they were increasing their protection by allowing US military bases on their soil. And now they've realized that far from being protected, they have become human shields of the American regime. And of course, they've also been dragged into this war by Israel. I think if the loudest voices were those that were going to win, then history would say that the Americans will win this war. But it doesn't. This war will belong to the bravest hearts, and those are the Iranian people who will show a determination that very few others can show. I would say that in terms of money, America has spent billions so far in a 2-week war that it thought would have been over. Trump said it'll be over in 3 to 4 weeks. He's not saying that anymore. The Gulf states are quite muted because, as I say, they're beginning to realize that by allowing US military bases on their soil, they've put a target on their back. And from Dubai's point of view, this will cripple the tourism industry, which is one of the most lucrative industries that the UAE relies on. It's no longer a hub for international flights. This war has impacted so many people around the world. from every motorist who relies on gas or oil for his car. Everyone has been impacted. And on the domestic front in America, this has been a disaster for Trump, who isn't seen as promoting America at all or make America great again. Millions from the so-called MAGA movement have fallen away from Trump. He promised them when he came to power, I am a man of peace. I'm not going to promote war. And now he's done the very opposite. And again, one of the questions that always arises on this program is the role of the United Nations. And we look at some of the bombings in Iran, and Iran has many sites that have been declared by the UN as sites of great importance by the organization UNESCO. But UNESCO has been very quiet about these bombs that have been thrown or lobbed on some of the buildings that go back 400-500 years. And we have to remember that the combined age of the United States and Israel is 325 years. You know, these are two countries without a history, without a culture, without any of the architectural jewels that Iran has. Mm-hmm. And they're damaging these sites of great importance, these historical sites, mm-hmm. without any thought at all about what they're doing. And of course, when the war started, the first missile, which was based on Israeli intelligence, by the way, the first missile that landed killed over 100 school children. So, you know, this war is disastrous. The public are not behind it in any country. You know, on the domestic front, I think that Trump will be stopped in his tracks and impeached by the very people who swept him to power, because he is clearly not making rational decisions. There are question marks over his health, and he's not coherent. He's rambling and ranting, and really the American people are now waking up to the fact that their president is insane.
Mm-hmm. Thank you indeed. And now back to you, Mr. Mohammed Chris Sassi. So if we're talking about the desperate measures that the U.S. is taking, especially with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, we see that the U.S. is considering releasing even 400 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the largest in history, by the way. So, but even that won't solve the problem if we look at it. If the Strait of Hormuz remains really closed, then the ports are being bombed. Now, is there any economic solution to a military problem such as this one? Or are we entering a prolonged period of high energy prices and stagflation, let's say?
I will again enhance the fact that, yes, the threat of Hormuz become an issue because, as I said, 20% of the energy for the world passed by. But now, as I said, it was declaration from Iran allowing certain countries to pass by, and a lot of them answer to that. So already you have an opening there. The other thing is, I still optimistic that you cannot solve the issue military. We are not going to have boots on the ground from the America in Iran. Iran is as big as Europe, 95 million people there, is not the Venezuela. And also, and I think Yvonne have a point that they said the first casualty of this war was the school where 140 little girls get killed. And now the first reaction of Trump was that he said it was an Iran missile, which is not true. Now it has been proven. Now we talk about the UN. The UN, who is in the UN? We have France, England, Russia, China, and America. All of this Security Council, they did 2 centuries of war against each other. And then they're all going to talk about peace, except China, who didn't win. That's ridiculous. And also, when I cannot hear my dear colleague from London, one word about all the destruction that is happening in Iran when Iran didn't address anybody. Again and again, I can talk about economics, but I cannot hide the fact that the media, and you have this megaphone from Mr. David Powell, I guess, from London. He forgets, he talk about 2023. Let's go back to history. What happened in 1952? What happened in 1979? What happened in 2008? And now what happened in 2026? Again and again, all what I'm saying and seeking right now, it was against Iran from Mossadegh to today's with the clerical, the supreme leader that they were asking. What kind of policy, what kind of hope you have from America or Israel to have peace? Now we go back to the GCC, and I know I'm talking about economics as well. Saudi Arabia and Iran, 2 years ago, they sit down at the same table to negotiate through the autonomies of China. And it seems to be working. And now we have Trump, and as Paul was saying, Oman negotiating and say, okay, I give you 10 days, etc. And when they were negotiating, you send your B-52 and your bomber. What kind of strategy is this? And how can you blame Iran to defend himself? Iran has been aggressed. He never touched Israel. He doesn't have any border with them, neither with America. And now you have all this, I think it's about 14 bases around Iran to kill them. They didn't succeed in the war with Saddam Hussein, so now they want to do it. It was the dream of Netanyahu. He gave false information, and now Trump tried to have a face saving. Economically, he's shooting in the foot his own country, not only with the oil crisis, with the tariff, and also he lost any kind of credibility. The people are looking at the GCC and they say, look all the billion they spent to protect themselves. And now what happened? America let them down. It's like the 1,000 night and one night with Alibaba and the 40 thieves. He come, they take the money, they take the billion, and they run away. They keep them by themselves. And they didn't do anything to protect them. And this economically, politically, is not right. And we have to look at it and to be very honest about what's going on the floor. 2023 was a disaster for everybody, but it's not because of Hamas, like Paul was saying. No, it was the result of 75 years of Palestinians living in a prison, open prison under the sky. They cannot do anything. Don't forget, 1948 was for two-state solution, not only one. And I would like Paul to talk about that a little bit, instead of saying that all the fault is because of the Iranian. All the fault is because now the Arabs are waking up. No, the Arab, they did the Iran war for 7 years. They were financing to kill Iran, and Iran succeed and come back alive. And now, of course, Israel, with false accusation, every single year for the last 40 years, he goes to the UN and saying in 2 weeks, Iran is going to have the nuclear power. I am sorry. I cannot buy that. And I have to say, honestly, as a citizen of the world, as a man of peace, Iran is in the position of self-defense, not the other way around, like it was said. Thank
Okay,
you.
let me just give the opportunity for Mr. David Powell to respond to your comments, Mr. Mohammed Kristasi. So, Mr. David Powell, according to Mohammed Kristasi, Iran is the victim here. It is the one that was aggressed by the US and Israel in this war, and it is merely defending itself, even if it's attacking its neighbors. Technically, it is doing so to target the US military bases where the attacks are coming from against Iran. Now, at the economic level, we see that perhaps Donald Trump is taking desperate measures to try to save the situation from escalating even more, but it doesn't seem that these measures are actually doing a good job. So what is your comment on this?
Well, just going back to Iran's attacks on neighboring states, I think it's now attacked 11 countries. I don't think those countries have all those countries have US bases. And in fact, the countries have made clear that they don't want those bases to be used in this attack on Iran. So they've distanced themselves from this latest attack by the US and Israel. I mean, there are no US bases in Oman. There are no US bases in Azerbaijan, which have both come under attack from Iranian missiles. So that it doesn't make sense to me. And the actual places being hit are not US bases. They're tower blocks in Dubai. They're oil installations in Saudi Arabia. So these are not attacks on US facilities. These are direct attacks on the neighbors. And the strategy is obviously to try and get them to pressure the US to stop this war. On that, in terms of whether Iran is defending itself, well, yes, it's come under attack in the last 2 weeks. If the Iranian regime hadn't wasted so much of its resources in waging a pointless war against Israel, then we wouldn't be in this position. I mean, this is a regime that only a few weeks ago shot an estimated 30,000 of its own citizens who took to the streets to demonstrate against it. This is not a regime that's popular. And if we talk about the Iranian people, it's not the Iranian people who are fighting the US. It's a regime that doesn't represent more than a fraction of its own people. It puts down ruthlessly any kind of protest. Now, whether the US strategy is actually to change the regime, that is a question. It looks to me as though the US war aims no longer include regime change. The defense secretary, or the war secretary, as they call them now in the US, Peter Hegseth, spelled out the war aims to destroy Iran's navy, to destroy its nuclear facilities, and its missile facilities, and didn't mention regime change. So to me, the big worry for me is that this war is going to end in a kind of indecisive position where the regime will still remain, or some remnant of the regime will still remain in power, albeit without the ability to fire missiles and use its nuclear program to create nuclear warheads to fire these missiles towards the Zionist entity, as it calls it, that it's pledged to destroy. If that was not the program, we wouldn't be in the situation we are today. Iran is pledged to wipe Israel off the map. That is a completely deranged, pointless strategy, and will only lead to more war. So I can only think, unless this regime changes its philosophy from one of destruction of a UN member state to becoming a rational governor of its own people and use its resources for the welfare of its own people, we're going to be in this position again. Because the war last June, the 12-day war in which Israel destroyed a certain number of missiles, those missiles have been rebuilt, have been restocked. Approximately 1,000 missiles in the last 9 months. So the regime obviously wants to keep going with this threatening posture to Israel and to its neighbours. So we'll be here again You know, if it keeps doing this, Israel sees, rightly or wrongly, you can debate whether this is right or wrong, but Israel sees Iran as an existential threat. Not only its nuclear program, but its ballistic missile program. Because if it builds up enough missiles, it thinks it will be able to overwhelm any Israeli air defenses. So it's an existential threat. So the Israelis will attack Iran again, and we'll be in the same position again. It's the regime that is the fundamental problem, and its deranged philosophy.
Thank you indeed. Well, we're going to discuss further that thought, but after this commercial break. Well, hello again, dear viewers, and you're watching tonight's special coverage. And as we stopped at a very interesting point that Mr. David Powell was talking about, I readdress the question to you, Dr. Hamoud Salhi. So according to David Powell, the regime in Iran needs to change its philosophy if it wants any peace, perhaps peace with its own population and peace with its own neighbors, because the very reason why it's being aggressed, because it simply consists an existential threat to its neighbors and to the entity. What is your comment in this? Is Iran really an existential threat to its neighbors and to the Zionist entity, for that matter, for the narratives that it uses, for the many examples we had from media that it wants to wipe out, perhaps, Israel from the map?
Frankly, these are talking points, narrative that the Israelis, the Americans have been propagating since 1979, presenting Iran as an existential threat to Israel, to the United States. And the United States has adopted strategies towards that end. We had the dual containment strategy under Bill Clinton, and in which Iran and Iraq were contained under sanctions and heavy military sanctions. In addition, the United States adopted what we call the Iran Bill, which is this is Congress, which was designed specifically to change the regime in Iran, and that law has been there for quite some time. You know, I'm surprised because usually this platform allows for objective narrative. We are constantly told when you mention Israel, you have to attack it. You have to also attack Hamas. But this is different. I mean, this platform allows us actually to think and to present facts from what I call really a social justice perspective. Now, we talking about, David, with due respect, mentioned that Iran is an existential threat to Israel, and it's designed to wipe out Israel from the globe. What happened in Gaza? I mean, this is just before us. What did the Israelis do in Gaza? What is the strategy that the Israelis had in Gaza, what they're doing, and it's still today? What is the purpose of going after Lebanon, where you have 1 million people displaced, other than achieving what we call the greater Israel dream? So a lot of sense when we stay with this talking point. We're only serving the purpose of making the matter worse and worse. They are designed to propel the notion that this region deserves what it has. And, you know, if you go back to the 60s, to the 50s, where it's always the Arab world has something wrong with it. If I'm not emotional, we are violent. I mean, when we refer to demonstration in the street, we talked about rage. We use that we are, you know, the Israelis calls us animals, calls the Palestinians animals. I mean, it's that narrative that depicts the Muslim world. And for that, to be specific, the Palestinians, the Iranians today, from a non-human perspective, is dehumanizing this conflict. It's as if the Iranian person or the Palestinian person doesn't have the same right to exist. And so, yeah, we could read history the way we want it, but the facts are different. When you have the governor of California who is running for elections, using the term describing Israel as an apartheid state, that gives you something. This is a person who is running for the elections, and he knows very well that this will cost him a lot of angry things, and he might cost him the elections for that matter. Goes on national television and declared that Israel is an apartheid. Jimmy Carter, who wrote a book about the apartheid. Everybody knows how Israel discriminates. Now, on the Iranian side, we always viewed this conflict as a conflict of perception until June 2025. We all know, if you read the book Bob Woodward on war, where he talks about Donald Trump. Donald Trump emerged in his book on war that he was the last one who wants to engage or to go with war with Iran. In fact, Bob Woodward called national security advisors who were using Iran. Whenever there is a crisis, they reach out to create something about Iran to distract the attention. This is by a Washington Post eminent journalist. It's not by someone who has no credibility. And to see Donald Trump come in today to change his views, and it is clearly that what happened in June 25, that Netanyahu has a lot to do with it. So in 2025, June 25, Netanyahu guaranteed success, victory. But then 12 days later, it turns out that the Israelis had to look for a way out, and the President Donald Trump served them. Back in January, when the demonstration was happening, it was the Israelis that pushed Donald Trump to not attack Iran because or support the demonstration, because they didn't feel they were ready to fight. And again, the latest report during this war, we were told, and I think Mark Rubio was very clear when he said that, we saw the Israeli doing it, and we didn't feel that if we don't do it, the Iranian would attack us, so we attacked. So again, it took perhaps 7 visits, personal visit of Netanyahu to the White House to meet Donald Trump. He certainly convinced him about that. And then look at the cabinet around him. So I'm not sure that the victim here is the culprit. The international law is clearly states that these states are sovereign. And to end all of this, and my apologies for this long intervention, the international law is clear. What gives the American and the Israelis the right to go and fight, to intervene in the internal politics of Iran? Demonstration exists everywhere. Why is the United States so centrally in Israel interested in this one particularly and not others?
Thank you indeed. And now let's move on to Dr. Yvonne Ridley. Dr. Yvonne, of course, a lot is going on, and the war seems doesn't to have an end, and things are escalating rapidly. Now, what is the mood in Europe, according to what you have been gathering? We saw, for example, former French Prime Minister Dominique de Villepin condemning the war as an illegal gamble. Now, are European populations supportive of this war, according to you, or is there growing opposition to this? And how long before European leaders are forced to distance themselves from Washington?
Well, there's mixed support in Europe, and this war is really dividing nations over the way that Trump is waging this war in Iran. This is an existential struggle for survival for Iran. They are in it for the long haul. The European leaders recognize that. and everybody, is still mindful of the horrors of World War II. The military presence of the USA in the Middle East is seen like a cancer, and by the Arab states, but the European states are also beginning to see the presence of the Americans as a liability. These forces are destabilizing the Middle East. And of course, during the days of colonial hegemony, a lot of European countries had vested interests in the Middle East. But I'd like to go back to David Powell when he said that Iran has said that it wants to wipe Israel off the map. If we can just get this straight, it was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who was the leader of Iran at the time, who said in a Holocaust conference in 2006 that the Zionist entity should be wiped off the map. And really, we need to differentiate between the Zionist entity and Israel. And we have to remember and be mindful of the fact that Israel is still being investigated for war crimes. And a lot of the rhetoric that has come out hasn't just come from the Iranian side. The deputy speaker in Israel, Nissim Vaturi, he called for the elimination of 100,000 Palestinians left in northern Gaza. And he said, I have no mercy for those who are still there. We need to eliminate them. This is Tel Aviv is a brutal regime that has ambitions for a greater Israel. The Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, he has also said he called the entire population of Gaza Nazis. Netanyahu himself has mentioned more than once in speeches the memory of Amalek. And that was when the Israelites in the Bible asked King Saul to exterminate. And he said, you must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible. So he's using all of these references, and it's not Iran that is saying, let's wipe Israel off the map. It's making quite a distinction between the evil ideology, political ideology of Zionism to Israel. And these are nuances which should be remembered. And, Benjamin Netanyahu held up a map during the 78th United Nations General Assembly in 2023 that depicted a new Middle East. Well, my God, if that's not wiping countries off the map, what is? His map included huge swathes of Saudi Arabia, of Egypt, of Jordan. The concept of a greater Israel is linked to revisionist Zionism and has been increasingly referenced by the Israeli government. This is a government that is out of control. And what we're not hearing as well from the Western media is Iran's war on Israel and what impact that is having. And there is an exodus of Israelis who don't want to live in Israel anymore. They want to get out, and they want to go back to their European homes and their homes in North America. And this again is an uncomfortable truth that the European leaders are now dealing with. Iran hasn't attacked 11 countries. It has attacked US and Israeli targets in 11 countries. And that is something that is quite different to saying that it has attacked 11 countries. I think David needs to stop watching the BBC because he's not getting the right information. The hit rate of the Iranians has been quite astonishing. But again, we're not getting this in the Western media, but according to other media, they have a 33% hit rate. But what they're targeting are American radar systems, which have currently cost the Americans more than $100 billion. This is really big bucks, and America is exaggerating its advance and success in this war. As I've said before, Iran is in this for the long term. They're not interested in talking or negotiating with the Americans. The Americans have proven that they are not a trustworthy nation that they can sit down and negotiate with. They did this over their nuclear ambitions, which have never ever included nuclear weapons, by the way. There is one nuclear state, and that's Israel, which has up to 200 nuclear warheads. And that is what is concerning the Europeans, just how far Israel is prepared to go in defending its position, because at the moment it is being battered. And in fact, in Israel, local Israelis have been told that if they take any photographs of targeted areas, they'll face a prison sentence. So, talking about regime crackdowns, the Israelis and the Americans, to a certain extent, do not want a free press reporting freely about the impact that the Iranian war is having. But it is having an impact, and it's hitting the working classes in the pocket. Every taxi driver, every bus driver, every lorry driver going to fill up gas and petrol is being hit with these extraordinarily high fuel prices and energy prices. And of course, it will come into everyone's home next when they get their domestic fuel bills. This is impacting on a lot of people, and it is because of the insane behavior of Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, both who have vested interests in keeping this war going to protect their own political careers.
But at what cost? And here, since you mentioned that it's going to be really costly for the pockets of the average American, the average European, let me redirect this question to Mr. Mohammed Kourisasi. Mohammed Kourisasi, we are gathering reports that there is a formation of B-52 bombers, actually, which have been spotted heading toward the Middle East. 11 B-1s and 3 B-52s that are already based in the UK and struck Iran on March the 3rd. Now, the B-52, as we know, is a 70-year-old heavy bomber capable of carrying 30 tons of bombs or 20 cruise missiles, including nuclear-capable ones. Now, it can strike without entering Iranian airspace using stealth missiles that Iran cannot detect. This is the kind of carpet bombing capability not seen since the war or the invasion of Iraq. Now, Mr. Mohammed Kourisasi, B-52s are known to be very expensive to fly, expensive to maintain, and the munition they carry are not cheap. This war is already costing billions, And the US is also sending 12,000 bombs to the entity. Now, who is paying for this war? And at what point does the cost of the war outweigh any possible strategic benefit, especially when the American economy is already facing inflation and potential recession?
Well, to answer your question, you have already the regular US military aid to Israel, and I will give you some number. I'm sorry, I'm going to give you some number. The United States provide Israel with about 3.8 billion a year military aid under a long-term agreement for which we as a US citizen are paying. Now, if you convert that to a daily amount, it will come what? 3.8 billion per year is 10.4 million per day. I repeat, 3.8 per year come to 10.4 million per day. Imagine what you can do to help the health insurance of the poor people, etc., etc. Now, this is costly. So, yes, made bomb and missile, the fighter jet part, the missile defense system like the Iron Dome, the military training and technology, all of this is paid by US taxpayer through the company, the defense company. So now, what can you justify that? A small country like Israel with 9 million people give you all this billion to go and attack a country that never did anything to them. That's number one. Now, you have also, after this number that I just gave you, I have to add a study that estimated that 21.7 billion in US military support to Israel since the Gaza war began in 2023. I repeat, on the top of what I told you before, you have another one that you have to add 21.7 billion since the Gaza war beginning in 2023. And then you just have an emergency arms sale include 20,000 bomb worth, and it cost us as taxpayer 650 million. All this number, they come from Brown University, and you can check them. Now, if I take this 21.7 billion, and who was spent over the 2 years with the Gaza, it becomes to 30 million per day. So therefore, if you conclude, you have the 30 million per day in Gaza, plus the 10 million that aid military. So we're talking about 40 million a day to help Israel doing genocide in Gaza, killing people that have nothing to do with the war, and fighting against the Hezbollah, the Hamas, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
So this, for me, the cost of the current regional war for the US is very, very costly. And how can I say, it had to come to an end. I don't think even the MAGA people now begin to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And now, if you want to take the 330 million people in America, and if you take the 3 million per year, now every single day, each and every American give $12 to help Israel killing people. Now, I don't know how Mr. Paul Doe is going to justify that, but I would like him to answer.
Well, technically, Mr. Mohammed Chris, I see we are reaching the end of our coverage.
And I would like to conclude on one thing, Tommy.
Yeah, actually, we have reached the end.
I would like to have a thought for the people of Gaza, to tell you that they have a ceasefire was concluded last year, but up to today's date, and at the moment I'm talking to you, more than 1,000 people are killed every day by Israel. And this, I would like that to enhance
Point
this number.
clear, Mr. Mohammed Kristasi. Let me just give a brief final word to Mr. David Powell. And my question is really general and simple. We know that Europe is heavily dependent on Gulf oil and gas, and with the Strait of Hormuz effectively closed and energy infrastructure under attack, European economies are facing an existential threat. Now, European leaders seem powerless to influence the events here. And according to you, is this the moment when Europe realizes it has no strategic autonomy, no military capability to protect its interest, and no choice but to follow the US into a disaster?
Well, no, I don't think the European states are going to follow the US in supporting this war. I mean, my own Prime Minister here in the UK has specifically said that he regards this as a breach of international law. So the UK, for one, is not going to join, although it does now it is now prepared to use its aircraft in self-defense, because the UK base in Cyprus came under direct attack, and it has agreed to allow the US to use UK bases for defence attack. So the UK policy is a little bit confused, and other European countries as well are not taking a direct role in this conflict. But when it comes to how they regard the US as a strategic partner, well, there's a lot of concern in the UK that Donald Trump was pulling out of Europe, wasn't prepared to underwrite European security as the US has since World War II. So there's concern in Europe, really, the US pulling back, and that Europe is struggling to find enough or to use enough of its own income to fund military spending enough to defend Europe. And it's the Ukraine war which is really in the forefront of European minds. And they see their own security is something that they realise they're going to have to need to pay more for, and therefore cut back on other aspects of their spending. That's the real debate within Europe, because it's driven in large part by the new Trump administration's policy not to give automatic carte blanche and support to Europe in whatever it does. It wants Europe to pay more for its own defence. That's the question that's really troubling Europe. And the Ukraine war, as I say, is forefront in people's minds. And just one aspect of the Ukraine war, which might be of benefit to the Ukrainians, is the 50,000 Iranian drones that Iran supplied to Russia that have been dropped on Ukrainian cities. Now, if that supply dries up, then maybe Ukraine will stand a better chance of pushing back against the Russian troops that invaded some 4 years ago.
Thank you indeed, Mr. David Powell. We have reached the end of our special coverage. Mr. David Powell, Dr. Yvonne Ridley, Dr. Hamoud Salhi, and Mr. Mohammed Kristasi, thank you indeed for all those insight. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This was All 24 News Special. I'm Karim Faz Zakri. Thank you for being with us, and until next time, good night.